On the outskirts of the town of Wishaw, next to the General Hospital, sits the King George V Park. At the entrance to the park sits a small memorial commemorating men of the Wishaw Heather Club who fell in the First World War. The story of the Heather Club, and the story of what came before the park, is a story waiting to be told. The area of Wishaw and neighbouring Craigneuk, where the park and the hospital now sits, was formerly industrial land and properties built to house the workers. Where the park sits was known as Berry Hill Rose, and part of the area became known as the Heathery after the nearby pit. It's not known when the Heather Club began, although it is thought to have been in the early 1900s. Details are sketchy, but it seems to have been a sports and social club for local men who lived and worked in the area. There was a connection to the local mission church, which can be seen on several maps near to Berry Hill Rose, so this may have been started as a means of keeping local workers out of the pubs. When the First World War broke out, it was reported that most of the members of the club enlisted, and for the duration of the war it was frequently reported when the club would pay tribute to its members who were departing for war or were home on leave. A social evening would be held in tribute, and a gift such as a watch or a cigarette case would be presented to the member who was being honoured. The club would also pay tribute to its members who fell, and after the war it was decided that a memorial would be erected to remember them. It was decided that the memorial would be placed in the grounds of the Sunnyside Mission Church, as many of the members of the club were connected to the church. The memorial was unveiled on Sunday the 12th of October 1919. The church was filled to capacity, with over 40 members of the Heather Club in attendance. After the service, the grounds of the church were filled as the memorial was unveiled. The memorial was originally made of sandstone, with a granite panel containing the names. At the top of the memorial was a wreath with the name of the club, together with a sprig of heather contained within it. At the bottom of the memorial was a sculpting of a rolling pen, together with a flag and crossed swords. Today, none of these details are on the memorial. For reasons which will become clear, the memorial has undergone a number of changes as the years have passed. In the years following the First World War, meetings continued. A memorial service was held in 1920 on the anniversary of the unveiling, and a concert was held in 1924 to help raise funds for the upkeep of the memorial. It seems that fund was sustained until the late 1930s, and a reunion party was held for the club in 1939 to enable funds to be raised to continue the upkeep of the memorial. However, with the outbreak of the Second World War, fundraising activities were instead diverted towards providing comforts to those serving. After the war, little is heard of the club in the local newspapers until the early 1950s. By 1952, the Mission Church was no longer, and while the memorial was still in the grounds of the building, the club approached the local town council in order to find a more suitable location. By this time, Berry Hill Rose were no more, and the King George V Park stood in its place, and it was agreed to move the memorial to the grounds of the park. While investigating the cost of moving the memorial, a proposal was put forward to move only the name panel, a suggestion which was rejected at the time. However, 10 years later, a force of nature meant this possibility had to be considered again. In September 1961, the town of Wishaw was battered by severe gales. Trees and gardens were damaged, and several chimneys were blown down. In addition to this, the Heather Club memorial was toppled over and smashed. The council, like they had 10 years previously, looked at the cost of re-erecting the memorial, but this time the cost of restoring it to its original condition was considered too high, and instead only the granite name plaque was kept. It was mounted on the original sandstone base which had survived, and within the new frame it was secured by steel rods to ensure that no further storm damage could be incurred. The final change from the memorial was a second move, this time away from the roundabout at the foot of Wishaw. Redevelopment of the area in the early 1970s meant that the boundary of the park had changed, leaving the memorial exposed, so it was moved to where it currently sits, next to the entrance of the park, and almost directly opposite its original location. Almost all of the original buildings on the road have gone, and where the church once stood is now the entrance to a Sports Direct. But what of the names on the memorial? Despite sharing a surname, it seems that William, Charles and Robert Shaw were not closely related. They don't share the same parents, but we can't discount the possibility of them being cousins. Charles Shaw was the first of the three to die. While serving with the 1st Battalion Highland Light Infantry, he was in the trenches near Neuve-Chapelle. On the 5th of July 1915, he was sent for water and was hit by a piece of artillery shrapnel. He was believed by his comrades to only be slightly wounded, but he died from his injuries 2 days later on the 7th of July 1915. William Shaw served with the 9th Battalion of the Black Watch, and he lost his life on the first day of the Battle of Lewes. He left behind a widow and 3 young children. Prior to joining the army, he had been an engineer and turner with Belhaven Limited. Robert Shaw had worked in Shields Colliery before joining the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. He'd been injured at Lewes in September 1915, but had recovered. He was seriously wounded on the 13th of October 1917, and died from his wounds 2 days later. Unlike the 3 Shaws, Livingston and Richard Clyde were brothers. Richard had reached the rank of corporal, and in a grenade attack where 4 or 5 grenades had been in the air at one time, while avoiding one, he was struck by another, and was killed almost immediately. Livingston Clyde had been killed in a battalion attack on the 12th of October 1917 while serving in the 8th Black Watch. He and Robert Shaw had been good friends, and had enlisted together. Gerald Aitkinson had been employed in Wishaw Steelworks, and had been presented with a wristlet watch by the members of the Heather Club in May 1916 before he departed for France. He was killed by a shell 3 months later, on the 20th of August. An officer, writing home to his mother, stated that they had not yet been able to recover his body from the battlefield. It seems likely that recovery proved impossible, as he is one of several members of the club with no known grave. We've been unable to find out much information about John Buchanan, but we believe he was 21 years of age and died on the 6th of September 1916. If anyone has any further information to confirm our research, please do contact us. George Ingalls was a painter to trade who joined the army in September 1914. He went to France in June 1915 and was killed instantly by shellfire on the 23rd of March 1918. James Anderson had joined the army early in the war, and had seen service in Egypt and Palestine before going to France in 1918. He was killed in action on the 14th of October 1918, the latest casualty in the memorial for who we have a confirmed date of death. His family recorded many in memoriam tributes to him in the local newspapers. The final name commemorated, James Moir, is an interesting one. His name was actually not included when the memorial was first unveiled in 1919, and it is not known when he was added. We've been unable to find any mention of him in the local newspapers for Wishaw around the time he died, and the only James Moir we've been able to locate in the Machine Gun Corps, a James Calder Moir, who died on the 21st of March 1918, was a Lanarkshire man but was connected to towns some distance from Wishaw. If there's a reason for his late inclusion and his connection to the Heather Club, it sadly remains a mystery for now. The Wishaw Press in April 1919 reported that from a total of 36 men who enlisted from the club, 7 had been killed, 18 wounded, and 2 had been prisoners of war. With that total killed seemingly now numbering 10, the sacrifice of the Heather Club cannot be understated, with more than 1/4 of them making the ultimate sacrifice. That sacrifice is unknown to the many people who pass by the memorial every day. Perhaps if you're one of those passing, take a moment to reflect, think of the names, and remember.